Mjolnir hits the bridge before Thor does. The hammer tears through the Enterprise's shields like paper, smashing into the deck with force that throws Kirk from his chair. Alarms scream, sparks fly, then silence. A beam of lightning crashes down. When it fades, he's there. Massive, ancient, armored in gold that's seen galaxies burn. His red cloak settles behind him. His eyes, storm blue and glowing, sweep across the terrified crew. Thor Odinson catches Mjolnir without looking. "Interesting vessel," he rumbles, voice vibrating through every console. "Fragile, but fast, I sense." Spock steps forward, phaser raised. "Identify yourself." Thor grins, teeth white against a battle-worn face. "I am Thor, Prince of Asgard, God of Thunder." He points Mjolnir at the view screen. "I've traveled between realms, outsmarted cosmic entities, fought beside Earth's mightiest heroes." His grin fades. "Now tell me, mortals, which reality have I fallen into?" Starfleet meets mythology. The bridge of the USS Enterprise existed for moments like this. Crisis managed through discipline, chaos filtered through training. But nothing in Starfleet Academy had prepared the crew for what materialized at its center. Thor Odinson did not beam aboard. He arrived. The air changed first. Every officer felt it, a pressure that had nothing to do with atmospheric controls. It pressed against eardrums, settled into bones, made hearts beat slower as if commanded. The temperature dropped 3 degrees in half a second. Ensign Chekhov's console sparked without cause, forcing him backward into his chair. Then came the light. A column of blue-white energy slammed through the hull without breaching it, as if the ship had opened a door it never knew it possessed. The beam lasted exactly 2 seconds. When it faded, he stood there. 7 feet of Asgardian warrior. Golden armor that had deflected weapons from 100 worlds, scarred and dented but unbroken. A crimson cloak that settled behind him like a war banner finding its pole. And in his right hand, a hammer that hummed with barely contained fury. Mjolnir, forged in the heart of a dying star, worthy of only one hand in all the realms. Thor Odinson looked around the bridge of the Enterprise with eyes that had witnessed the birth of galaxies, and he smiled. "By Odin's beard," he said, voice rolling through the bridge like distant thunder. "What curious vessel is this?" No one moved. Hands hovered over phasers that suddenly felt inadequate. Lieutenant Sulu's fingers tightened on navigation controls, ready to execute evasive maneuvers against a threat standing 15 feet away. Spock recovered first. His tricorder was already in motion, scanning, analyzing, failing. The device emitted a series of frustrated chirps before displaying readings that contradicted themselves. Energy signatures spiked and collapsed faster than Vulcan logic could process. "Captain," Spock said, voice carefully controlled, "I am detecting biological readings consistent with humanoid physiology, overlaid with energy patterns that predate known stellar formation." Kirk rose from his chair. Every instinct screamed at him, some urging retreat, others demanding immediate action. He listened to neither. Instead, he straightened his uniform and stepped forward. "You're aboard the Federation Starship Enterprise," Kirk said, voice steady despite everything. "I'm Captain James T. Kirk. Identify yourself." Thor's gaze settled on Kirk, not threatening, not dismissive, measuring, weighing courage rather than rank, character rather than authority. "I am Thor," he replied, "son of Odin, Prince of Asgard, God of Thunder." He paused, looking at the view screen where stars burned cold and eternal. "And I believe I have traveled further than even the Bifrost intended." The name meant nothing to the crew, but the way he spoke it made it feel like it should. Like history itself had decided to walk among them. Uhura's hands trembled slightly over her communications console as channels flickered with unexplained static. Lieutenant Commander Scott's voice crackled over the intercom, thick with Scottish disbelief. "Captain, I don't know what just happened, but the warp core is singing. Actually singing, like it's happy about something." Kirk kept his eyes on Thor. "Singing how, Scotty?" Harmonics I've never seen before. Power output is up 12% without any input changes. It's like the engines are... He paused, searching for words that didn't exist in engineering manuals. Inspired, Thor chuckled softly. Your vessel has a strong heart. It recognizes the storm and welcomes it. Before Kirk could respond, the Enterprise shuddered. Not from impact, from resonance. Something in deep space had noticed Thor's arrival. Something vast. Red alert flared without anyone touching a control. On the view screen, space itself began to tear. The rift opened like a wound in reality. Through it poured vessels unlike anything in Starfleet records. Angular, predatory ships that pulsed with energy readings that defied classification. Their hulls seemed to drink light rather than reflect it. Weapons charged with ruthless efficiency, targeting systems locking onto the Enterprise with cold precision. "Shields up! Evasive pattern, Delta!" Kirk commanded, already moving. The Enterprise leaped aside as the first volley scorched through the space it had occupied moments before. Explosions bloomed in vacuum, silent, deadly, too close. Thor's expression shifted from curiosity to recognition. "Hunters," he said quietly. "Seekers of the infinite path. They track disturbances across realities." Spock looked up from his station. "You know these beings?" "I know their kind. They believe power must be controlled or eliminated. There is no middle ground in their philosophy." Another volley struck the Enterprise's shields. Consoles sparked. Lieutenant Sulu fought the helm as the ship rocked violently. Chekhov reported shield integrity dropping, 80%, 70%, falling. The enemy fleet moved with synchronized precision, cutting off escape routes, herding the Enterprise toward the center of their formation. This was not random aggression. This was a hunt perfected over millennia. Kirk's mind raced through options. Outgunned, outmaneuvered, facing technology beyond their understanding. Starfleet training had prepared him for difficult odds. It had not prepared him for impossible ones. Thor stepped forward, lightning beginning to arc between his fingers. "Captain, your weapons will not breach their shields. Their hulls are designed to absorb directed energy. Then what do you suggest?" Thor smiled. A warrior's smile, hungry for battle. "I suggest you trust the storm." Before Kirk could respond, Thor moved. Not toward an escape pod or transporter room. He strode to the center of the bridge, raised Mjolnir above his head, and brought it down against the deck with controlled force. The impact sent a shockwave through the Enterprise, not destructive, but transformative. Systems that had been struggling suddenly stabilized. Shield harmonics shifted to frequencies the enemy weapons couldn't track. The ship itself seemed to awaken, responding to Thor's presence on a level no engineer could explain. Then Thor did something impossible. He walked toward the view screen, stepped through it as if it were water, and emerged into the vacuum of space. No suit, no helmet, no tether. His cloak snapped behind him in non-existent wind, and lightning wreathed his body like armor forged from the sky itself. The bridge crew watched in stunned silence as Thor floated between stars, Mjolnir spinning in his hand, building momentum that warped light around its edges. The Seekers adjusted their attack, concentrating fire on the lone figure in space. Beams capable of shattering battleships converged on Thor from a dozen angles. He caught them. Not deflected, not dodged, caught. Lightning erupted from Mjolnir, creating a web of energy that absorbed the enemy fire, converted it, amplified it. Thor's eyes blazed like twin supernovas. "You hunt gods?" His voice carried across vacuum, transmitted through energy rather than air. "Then face one!" He hurled Mjolnir. The hammer became a comet of destruction, trailing lightning that leaped from ship to ship. Shields that had dismissed phaser fire crumpled like paper. Hulls designed to withstand reality fractures tore open. The Seeker formation scattered as 3 of their vessels detonated simultaneously. Thor recalled Mjolnir without looking, catching it as naturally as breathing, and dove toward the largest remaining enemy ship. He crashed through its hull, lightning exploding through its corridors, and emerged moments later, dragging the vessel's commander by the throat. The Seeker leader was humanoid but wrong, features too sharp, eyes that reflected impossible geometries. It struggled uselessly against Thor's grip. "Deliver a message to your masters," Thor commanded, voice echoing across every communications channel. "This realm is protected. Tell them a god stands here. Tell them to be afraid." He released the commander, sending it tumbling back toward its crippled ship. The remaining Seeker vessels did not hesitate. They tore open reality and fled, vanishing into rifts that sealed behind them. Thor returned to the Enterprise slowly, landing on the bridge with controlled force. The deck plating scorched beneath his boots, but held. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Kirk exhaled. That was something. Thor looked around at the crew, at humans who had stood their ground beside a god against impossible odds. "You did not flee," he said, genuine respect in his voice. "Your people have courage." Spock raised an eyebrow. Retreat would have been illogical given the tactical situation. Thor laughed, a sound like rolling thunder. "I like this one. He finds logic in bravery." McCoy's voice cut through the intercom. "Bridge, this is sickbay. I'm getting reports of minor injuries throughout the ship, and my medical scanners are having some kind of existential crisis. Mind telling me what the hell just happened up there?" Kirk glanced at Thor. "Doctor, we have a guest, and things are about to get very interesting." The hours that followed brought questions without answers. Thor explained what he could: the 9 realms, the Bifrost, the cosmic forces that connected dimensions like threads in an infinite tapestry. Something had gone wrong during his last journey. A surge of dark energy had redirected his path, depositing him in a universe that operated by different rules. Spock listened with analytical intensity. "You describe a multiverse theory consistent with certain quantum hypotheses, though the mechanism of travel remains beyond current understanding." "Your science is young," Thor said, not unkindly. "Give it time. You have already learned to ride stars. The rest will follow." Kirk ordered a course toward Starbase 47 for repairs and resupply. The Enterprise moved through space that still felt charged, as if the confrontation with the Seekers had left permanent marks on the fabric of reality. In sickbay, McCoy conducted what examinations he could. His tricorder had given up producing sensible readings, so he relied on older methods: observation, intuition, plain human stubbornness. "Your physiology is impossible," McCoy said flatly. "Your cellular structure is simultaneously organic and energetic. Your cardiovascular system appears to be generating its own electromagnetic field, and your hammer is somehow reading as both inanimate matter and a living organism." Thor sat patiently on the bio-bed, amused by the doctor's frustration. "I have been called many things, healer. Impossible is among the kinder descriptions." "How old are you, really?" Thor considered. "By your counting of years, perhaps 1500, perhaps more. Time flows differently in Asgard." McCoy stared at him for a long moment, then reached into his desk and pulled out a bottle of Saurian brandy. "I need a drink. You want one?" Thor grinned. "Now, that is the first sensible thing anyone has said to me since I arrived." They drank together, a god and a country doctor, and for a moment the vastness of the universe seemed slightly less overwhelming. On the bridge, Kirk and Spock analyzed the data from the battle. The Seekers had been formidable, but Thor had dismantled them with almost casual efficiency. That power was reassuring when directed at enemies. It would be terrifying if it ever turned elsewhere. "He could destroy this ship," Kirk said quietly. "Probably the entire fleet." Spock nodded. "And yet he chooses restraint. The philosophical implications are significant." "What do you mean?" "A being of virtually unlimited power who elects to protect rather than dominate suggests that morality is not merely a construct of limited beings. It can exist independently of necessity." Kirk smiled slightly. "Spock, did you just find religion?" "Negative, Captain. I found data." The peace lasted less than 6 hours. Uhura detected the signal first, a transmission that bypassed normal channels, inserting itself directly into the ship's systems. The view screen activated without command, displaying not an image but a presence. Abstract patterns of light and shadow, folding and unfolding in ways that hurt to observe. Thor's expression hardened. The Council of Watchers. They observe universes. They rarely interfere. The patterns spoke, not in sound, but in meaning that formed directly in minds. They had witnessed the battle. They had analyzed the anomaly called Thor. They had concerns. Power attracted power. Thor's presence in this universe had already drawn the Seekers. It would draw others, entities far more dangerous, far more ancient. The Council had seen civilizations rise and fall. They had no attachment to outcomes, only to stability. Kirk stepped forward. "What are you asking?" The Council did not ask. They stated. Thor represented a variable that destabilized probability matrices across multiple sectors. His removal would restore equilibrium. Thor's grip tightened on Mjolnir. "You speak of balance, but you mean control. I have heard such arguments from tyrants before." The Council responded without emotion. Tyrants conquered. They merely calculated. The mathematics of Thor's presence projected catastrophic divergence within 3 standard years. The logical solution was obvious. "The logical solution," Spock interjected, "presumes that catastrophic divergence is inherently negative. History suggests otherwise. Evolution requires disruption." The Council paused. A Vulcan defending illogic. Another variable they had not predicted. Kirk pressed the advantage. "You've watched for ages. How many civilizations have you saved through intervention? How many have you allowed to fall through inaction?" No response. The patterns flickered, uncertain. Thor spoke then, not with threats, but with something far more dangerous: conviction. "I have lived long enough to know that safety is an illusion. The only question worth asking is not what threatens us, but what are we willing to become?" He looked at Kirk, at Spock, at the crew who had stood beside him. These people choose to explore, to risk, to grow. You would deny them that because it disrupts your equations. The Council processed, calculated, and for the first time in millennia, they recalculated. The transmission ended without farewell. But in the silence that followed, something had shifted. The Watchers would continue watching, but they would no longer act. Not yet. Thor exhaled slowly. "That was closer than I would have preferred." Kirk raised an eyebrow. "You get threatened by cosmic entities often?" "Tuesdays mostly." 3 days passed. The Enterprise conducted repairs at Starbase 47, where Thor's presence caused a diplomatic incident that required Kirk's best negotiating skills to defuse. The Andorian ambassador demanded to know why a weapon of mass destruction was being transported on a Federation vessel. The Tellarite delegation argued that Thor should be shared equally among Alliance members. The Vulcan representative simply observed, cataloging data. Through it all, Thor remained patient. He understood bureaucracy. Asgard had its own councils, its own endless debates. Power meant nothing without the wisdom to wield it carefully. But patience had limits. On the 4th day, space screamed. Not metaphorically. Sensors across 3 sectors detected a sound that traveled through subspace itself, a frequency that predated the formation of stars. Ships reported crew members collapsing, clutching their heads. Planets experienced simultaneous seismic events without geological cause. Something was coming, something old, something hungry. Thor felt it before the sensors confirmed it, a pressure against his consciousness. Probing, tasting. He knew this sensation. He had hoped never to feel it again. "The Devourer," he said, voice hollow. "It has found me." Spock looked up from his station. "Clarify." "An entity that exists between dimensions. It consumes imbalance, anything that threatens the natural order of a reality. God's cosmic artifacts, advanced civilizations. It considers all of them viruses to be eliminated." Kirk stood. "How do we fight it?" Thor's silence was answer enough. The Enterprise raced toward the source of the disturbance, joined by a hastily assembled fleet, Klingon warbirds, Romulan vessels, even a few ships from species that had no formal alliance with the Federation. Fear made strange allies. The Devourer manifested as absence. A sphere of nothing, not darkness, not vacuum, but the complete erasure of existence. Stars that approached its edge simply ceased to be. No explosion, no debris, just absence. The fleet opened fire. Phasers, disruptors, plasma torpedoes, every weapon available struck the entity's surface and vanished. Not deflected, not absorbed, erased. The Devourer continued advancing, utterly indifferent to the assault. Thor watched the futile attack, memories surfacing unbidden. He had seen this before. A world called Korath, beautiful and proud, reduced to nothing in moments. A civilization of artists and philosophers, their entire history erased as if it had never existed. He had been young then, arrogant, certain that strength alone could solve any problem. The Devourer had taught him otherwise. It cannot be destroyed, Thor said, but it can be denied. Kirk turned. How? Thor looked at Mjolnir, then at the crew around him. It feeds on imbalance, on power that does not belong. I am that imbalance here. He met Kirk's eyes. If I leave, no. Kirk's voice was iron. We don't sacrifice people to monsters, not while I'm captain. This is not sacrifice. It's giving up. And I've read enough history to know that's never the answer. Thor stared at Kirk for a long moment. This mortal, with his fragile body and limited lifespan, refusing to bend before inevitability. It was irrational, it was stubborn, it was magnificent. Spock spoke then, voice thoughtful. Captain, the entity responds to imbalance, but imbalance is a relative concept. What if we altered the frame of reference? Thor's eyes widened slightly. You would need to change the fundamental nature of my presence here. Not change, Spock said. Share. The plan was insane by any rational measure. Spock had calculated the probabilities. Kirk had ignored them. And Thor had agreed because for the first time in centuries, someone had surprised him. The Enterprise moved forward alone, the rest of the fleet falling back to a safe distance. Thor stood at the center of the bridge, Mjolnir resting against the deck. Around him the crew had assembled, not ordered to, but choosing to. Kirk spoke first. What you're about to see will probably violate every regulation in Starfleet. I want that on record. Noted, Uhura said with a slight smile. Thor closed his eyes. He reached inward, past the lightning, past the strength, to the core of what made him divine. Not power, but connection. The ability to touch and be touched by forces greater than himself. Then he reached outward. Lightning flowed from him. Not as a weapon, but as a gift. It touched every console, every system, every being on the ship. For one moment, the crew of the Enterprise felt what Thor felt. The weight of centuries, the joy of battle, the grief of loss, the hope that refused to die. And something unexpected happened. They answered, not with power they had none to give, but with something Thor had forgotten existed. Belief, trust. The willingness to stand beside him not because they had to, but because they chose to. The Devourer sensed the change. It paused for the first time in its eternal existence. The imbalance it had targeted was shifting, spreading, becoming something it could not quantify. Thor opened his eyes, blazing with light that was no longer entirely his own. You wanted to consume a god, he said, voice layered with the will of every soul on the Enterprise. But gods are nothing without those who believe in them. And these people believe in something greater than power. They believe in each other. He raised Mjolnir, not as a weapon, but as a symbol. Lightning erupted outward, but instead of striking the Devourer, it illuminated it, exposed it, showed what lay at its heart, not hunger, but fear. The terror of a universe that could not control itself. The desperate need to impose order on chaos. You are not a destroyer, Thor said with sudden understanding. You are a prison, and you have kept yourself locked inside for so long that you forgot there was any other way to exist. The Devourer trembled. Reality shook around it, and then, impossibly, it spoke. Not in words, in emotion. Loneliness so vast it had crushed galaxies. despair so complete it had become purpose. The entity had not chosen to devour. It had been shaped by endless isolation into something that consumed because connection was impossible. Thor lowered Mjolnir. It doesn't have to be. He extended his hand, not with power, but with invitation. The devourer hesitated, and in that hesitation, something broke. Not the entity, its certainty, its absolute belief that existence meant destruction. Slowly, impossibly, the sphere of absence began to recede, not defeated, released. The entity retreated into dimensions beyond perception, carrying with it something it had never possessed before: doubt. The stars returned, the fleet stood down, and the Enterprise drifted through space that felt somehow cleaner than before. Thor stood in the transporter room, Mjolnir resting at his side. The connection he had forged with the Enterprise was fading, reality reasserting its boundaries. He could feel Asgard calling him home. Kirk waited with him, along with Spock, McCoy, and the rest of the bridge crew. No speeches, no ceremonies, just presence. "You could stay," Kirk offered, knowing the answer. Thor smiled. "This universe has its own guardians now. It does not need a god, only the memory of one. To remind it what is possible," McCoy stepped forward, pressing a small flask into Thor's hand. "Saurian brandy, for the road." Thor laughed, a sound like rolling thunder, and tucked the flask into his belt. "You are a good healer, Leonard McCoy, and a better friend." Spock inclined his head slightly. "It has been fascinating." "Highest compliment," Kirk translated. Thor looked at them one last time. These impossible people who had stood against cosmic forces with nothing but courage and conviction. "Remember this," he said, "not the battles, not the power. Remember that you chose to stand. When everything said run, you stood." He raised Mjolnir. "And that is worth more than all the thunder in the 9 realms." Lightning wrapped around him, gentle, warm, welcoming. The Bifrost reached across realities, finding its prince, drawing him home. When the light faded, Thor was gone. But something remained, an energy signature that Starfleet science would spend decades trying to understand. A resonance in the Enterprise's systems that made the ship fly just a little faster, respond just a little better, and in the hearts of those who had witnessed it, a truth that needed no explanation. The universe was vast and dangerous and full of impossible things. But so were they. Kirk returned to the bridge, took his seat, and looked at the stars ahead. "Set course for the next mission," he ordered. "Warp factor 6. The Enterprise leaped forward, carrying her crew into the unknown. Behind them, something ancient watched, and for the first time in eons it smiled. The end.